Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. Summer is in full swing, and in some places in the US, it's almost as if we didn't go through a year of pandemic, quarantine, and massive shutdowns. But getting New York City back on its feet, commerce, infrastructure, and more is a difficult task, especially when you're dealing with a city of over 220,000 businesses, 98% of them small. So what does the reopening look like and how does it get done? Joining us now is Deshaun Mars. He is the Senior Director of Business Recovery at the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. His experience includes being the Director of Business Outreach at the NYC Department of Small Business Services. He got his bachelor's and master's from Brown University. Deshaun, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Hi, afternoon. How's everything?
It's great. I'm here in Brooklyn, ready for this conversation, ready to talk reopening. But before we do that, I want to join us with Michael Park. He's joining us as well. He's the general manager of shopin.nyc, a platform that provides groceries and goods from local stores to the broader community. He was the director of marketing at the F Factor and Fillmore Labs. He received his MBA from New York University's Leonard School of Business. Michael, welcome to the show.
New York City's back. Couldn't be more excited. Caroline, great to be here with you, and Deshaun, you as well.
We're back, baby. I'm so excited for this conversation, but I think we do have to start with what just a monumental task it's been for both of you to get this city back up and running. Deshaun, I'll start with you. You started at the Chamber of Commerce about 9 months ago. Bring us back to November. What were some of the biggest challenges you were facing once you started?
All right, so thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you for having us on your show today. So I'm actually going to take it a little further back to March 2020. If you can think about what was happening then with our businesses, there was so much uncertainty about what was happening with the coronavirus. There were so many shutdowns that were happening. Different rules and regulations were changing constantly. So a ton of uncertainty for businesses. It was hard for businesses to plan from 1 day to 1 week to 1 month. So it was a really difficult and uncertain time for our businesses. But when we think about when I first started at the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, the business environment has completely shifted for businesses pretty much overnight. So when I'm thinking back to my time starting at the Chamber and doing our recovery work, a lot of our businesses didn't have an online presence. So businesses who were relying on customers simply walking into their doors, they've had to think about how do they expand their customer base. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is making sure that businesses can get online, but then also we've been connecting businesses to financing. So we were helping businesses with the Paycheck Protection Program. Again, when you had such a sudden shift in how businesses were operating, their revenue went completely down. So we were helping businesses kind of figure out how can they shift, how can they pivot, how can they get online, how can they have a digital presence to make sure that they're still able to compete in a very different business world.
And Michael, shopin.nyc plays a big role in making sure that these businesses have an online presence. First off, talk to us a little bit about the business, but then how did COVID impact this company's growth? I know you guys are venture backed. What happened as soon as this pandemic started?
Absolutely. I mean, like as Deshaun said, I mean, with COVID happening, it's just completely, it accelerated e-commerce as we know, but we saw the players that were taking advantage of that. And we know that from New York City is the greatest city in the world. We all know that. And why? Because we have an incredible amount of diversity, the best group of cultures coming together. And with that, the best brands and the best products. And with that, it's the individual owners that have these incredible stores. And our platform allows these local stores to come all in one place. So imagine being able to go to Sahadi's and getting their famous hummus in Brooklyn and getting a gift for your loved ones on the Upper East Side and 100 other stores all in one basket in a sustainably sourced bag, white glove delivered to your home for free, same or next day. So our platform aggregates the local stores in New York City and allows for a one-stop shop, the everything store, everything that you need together in New York City, keeping it local. And so that fuels the economy, it creates jobs, and it keeps it sustainable, and it keeps these cool, unique items that define New York City all at reach of our hands.
Well, Michael, I'm going to have to go ahead and check to see if shopin.nyc has Gus's Pickles, because I went to my local Trader Joe's for the first time since the pandemic started, and there's no Gus's Pickles stand outside of Trader Joe's anymore, and I'm pretty upset about that. So I'll just have to go online and see if I can buy them from shopin.nyc. But before I do that, I want to say hello to some members who are joining us in the stream. We have people from all over the country and the world joining us. Christine is joining us from right here in New York. Vincenzio from Italy, and James from Florida. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. And if you're just tuning into the stream, we're having a conversation right now about the grand reopening here in New York City. Some may say the best city in the world. If you have questions for how this happened, we have two experts here, one from the Chamber of Commerce and one from shopin.nyc, talking to us about how this reopening is happening and the challenges ahead. So let us know your questions in the stream and we'll get them answered on today's show. Deshaun, as I just said, we have people from all over the world joining us. A lot of people may not have even been to New York during the pandemic. Probably not, because it was hard to travel here during that. Walk us through, break down a little bit for us what this reopening has looked like on your end, particularly, let's say, over the summer.
No, absolutely. So for the last 2 months, New York City has been fully reopened. New York City has been doing a phenomenal job with the COVID vaccine, with getting things back up and running. But that doesn't mean that everyone is back to work in person quite yet. So with the pandemic, we had to quickly shift to working remotely. Some places did a hybrid model, but many of our employers and a lot of our businesses still aren't up to full capacity with their office workers. So if you think about it, the office culture in New York City, if you think about, Wall Street, downtown Manhattan, Midtown, where there's primarily commercial real estate, and you don't have a lot of residential units, those residential units will support that local economy. And when you have office workers who are going into offices, into buildings, these are people that are going to lunch downstairs in their businesses. Before work, they might be grabbing a coffee. If you're going in person, you might go to your local cleaners because you need to get your suit laundered. So when we think about what's been happening in New York City, because a lot of our office workers aren't completely back inside their office buildings quite yet, and because the nature of work looks very, very different, given that we've introduced these work from home models and these hybrid work models, that local economy is going to look very, very different moving forward. So when I think about the recovery in New York City, I think about what work looks like, where work is going to happen, and if work doesn't return back to those office buildings, what's going to happen to that local economy, that local butcher, that local cleaners, the local coffee shop? All of those different industries are going to be impacted.
Well, Deshaun, you mentioned that a lot of knowledge workers, particularly in downtown New York, are working remotely, but we have data here at LinkedIn that's showing they might not be working in New York at all anymore. This is data from March, which I want to get your perspective on. This is showing where workers are moving, and these are the biggest gains of where people are moving: Salt Lake City, Jacksonville, Richmond, and unfortunately, New York and San Francisco are seeing a dip in terms of knowledge workers leaving the city for other opportunities. Now, I mentioned that this data is back in March. Now with 70% of New Yorkers having their first vaccine dose, is this still the case? Are you seeing that talent is leaving the city at this point during the pandemic?
So I think what's going to happen is that, New York City is back. This is the greatest city in the world. No hate to any of those other businesses, but the New York City is reopening. We've been doing a phenomenal job, like I mentioned, with the pandemic, with the vaccine. So people are starting to come back in. If you look at some of the big banks and hedge firms, a lot of them are requiring for their workers to come back into the office in New York City. So those those statistics that you just shown on the screen, that was, a couple of months ago. I think with the reopening, New York is such a phenomenal place. It's a really, really special place. And I think our tourism is going to come back. We're going to have our office workers coming back. A lot of our industries are based here in New York City. So I think you're going to see a turnaround in some of those numbers as people return back to the city and as people get back to work.
And Michael, that return, it happened really quickly for a lot of businesses that shopin.nyc supports, went from 25% to 100% opening in just the span of a few weeks. What are you hearing from business owners in terms of the challenges of seeing that flip of a switch, almost the reverse of what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic when everything shut down overnight?
Sure. What we're hearing is the common trouble of ensuring that you are able to quickly staff back up and are able to fulfill the demand that has really returned with a fury. And the great thing is with our platform that we're able to actually have incremental sales for all the businesses involved by having that discoverability. And so it is allowing a win-win situation where you're able to get more sales. So these businesses have more revenue, then they have more money to be able to have the proper support staff. So it's happening one step at a time, but we're hearing only positive momentum that it's all going in the right direction.
And Deshaun, that really gets to the labor shortage that we're seeing nationally right now. But I want to get your unique perspective on what this looks like in New York City. New Yorkers are impatient. I'm waiting for my coffee longer. I'm waiting for my table longer. I mean, I'm so excited to be back out there, but it's apparent just walking the streets right now that businesses are having a hard time finding workers. Where are we at this point?
So it's funny that we're having this conversation now because the Brooklyn Chamber, we just held a job fair this morning in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn. So when you think about these labor shortages, Caroline, like you mentioned, if a business is ramping up their operations, the reopening was happening pretty quickly. We went from 50% capacity to full capacity, and it feels like that happened very, very fast. So just think about if you are a worker and this was pre-March 2020, you had your restaurant job, you had a connection with your employer, the pandemic hit, things shut down. Now, as a worker, similar to an employer and businesses, you've had to think about how to pivot. You may have thought about how to retool, maybe get a different certification. You might have been looking in a different industry to see how your skills can transfer to another job. So a lot of those businesses who had those connections with their employees pre-pandemic, as they started to ramp up, a lot of those workers aren't there, unfortunately. So when you talk about going to a restaurant, you might have to wait a little bit longer if that business can't staff up immediately. So that's one thing that we're seeing from a lot of our businesses, that they're looking for those employees. Those employees aren't there quite yet. And I know there's a lot of discussion around the unemployment insurance and what some of the implications are and why we have that labor shortage. But it's a very complex and nuanced situation. If you think about New York City and our school system, schools were remote for the entire year. They're going to be back in person in September. So you could have been a single parent. You could have been both parents in the household, but you don't have that childcare. So you need to figure out what you're doing if you're able to return back to work. So it's a really nuanced conversation about why we're seeing those labor shortages, but major implications for those businesses as they ramp up. But as a consumer, you're definitely going to feel that if that mom and pop business can't get the employees that they need.
Well, you mentioned the issues that working parents are facing right now, which is something that we see a lot of on LinkedIn. Really quickly, where are we with childcare center openings? Do you have the latest stats on here in New York City? Are the childcare centers all open at this point, or what percent are we at right now? Because of course, that's preventing a lot of people from getting back to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as far as I understand, a lot of those restrictions are being lifted on the childcare centers, the Department of Ed, education, buildings. So in September, we will be fully in person. I was just talking to a business in East Flatbush in central Brooklyn, and a lot of the local businesses and a lot of the local parents that typically send their children to this childcare center, they're still not back at work quite yet. So for our childcare centers, it really all depends on that local economy and if people are back to work. But in the fall, we will be fully open. So this is just a transitory period right now where childcare centers, educational centers are trying to figure out what's going to happen with parents sending their kids back. So that's all also going to depend on if those parents are back to work. But in the fall, we will be fully in person for Department of Ed and for schools.
That's great to hear. I'm sure a lot of parents in New York who are joining us in the stream right now are glad to hear that as well. Michael, let's talk specifically about retail, because retail is one of the industries that was hardest hit during the pandemic, and now they're having one of the hardest times attracting workers back. Are the small businesses that shopin.nyc supports hiring right now? What are the challenges that they're facing and the opportunities, quite frankly?
Well, from a hiring perspective, our company really believes in a fair wage. And so for a lot of our jobs from a fulfillment, delivery perspective, customer service, we start at $20, $25 an hour. So we believe in fair wages. I mean, we hear about some of these other companies with starting at much lower. We believe in you need to be comfortable in order to be able to execute. But we are hearing the feedback that these jobs are coming back locally, and we're here to support it. And from an education standpoint, that's another big priority from Shop in NYC. We give 1% of our sales to the local schools in New York City, and we are creating a back to school program where we want to make it a one-stop shop for all parents buying their back to school needs. We will have bundles, we'll have a concierge service. We're going to make it seamless and priced very fairly so that we're able to deliver all your needs from back to school perspective right to you.
That's great to hear. Of course, I don't have to tell either of you that the pandemic brought up a lot of issues when it comes to inequities within the city. I actually want to play for you something that Richard Florida told us about a year ago on the show, with the heat of the pandemic, just about some of the inequities that he was seeing and the opportunities moving forward. I want to get both of your takes on this quote that we have for you.
If we use this crisis and coupled with the tremendous outpouring of civil disobedience that we've seen, some people call it unrest, but an incredible surge of multi-class, multiracial protest about the inequities of our cities and society, if we take this opportunity, we may be able to make our cities more equitable and more affordable, and actually bring back middle-class people and artistic and other creatives, and make cities a better place for less advantaged communities as well. So I think we'll be okay in the long run.
Deshaun, I'll start with you. I'm sure equity is top of mind for you at the Chamber of Commerce. What are the talking points right now? What are the policies that you are trying to put in place to ensure that the world that we are creating post-pandemic is more equitable than the one that we left behind?
Yep. So one program that we have at the Brooklyn Chamber is our New York City Small Business Resource Network. So it's a citywide program with all the borough chambers of commerce. And we have recovery teams that are deployed all throughout New York City to work one-on-one with businesses. A lot of our efforts, we're directly going to those places that were disproportionately impacted by COVID. So that's Central Brooklyn. Those are our places that are low income, primarily Black and brown and businesses of color, women-owned businesses as well. So a lot of the work that we're doing is specifically targeted to those businesses that have felt this impact. When we think about the challenges from COVID, yes, we're going through a public health crisis that we haven't seen in a generation. So that's one thing that our communities are going through. There are disproportionate health outcomes for a lot of our communities when you think about a lot of those underlying health concerns that a lot of folks in our community have. So the public health crisis is one thing that we're facing. But then two, as we're thinking about our businesses, those businesses that fared the best through the pandemic were those that had enough cash on hand, or those that were able to get capital and flexible financing. A lot of our mom and pop businesses, the margins are extremely tight. So many of our businesses didn't have enough cash on hand to last 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, even a couple of weeks with these shutdowns. So we've seen there's been disproportionate impact from COVID with these business shutdowns on our business community. So we've been very intentional at the Brooklyn Chamber in making sure that we're going to those mom and pop businesses, those smaller businesses in those low income communities, to make sure that they understand that the Brooklyn Chamber is here to support and that there are resources that are available. But we've been very, very targeted in terms of what resources we're going to be directing to which communities. So that's one small thing that we're trying to do, just to make things a little bit more equitable in our communities.
That's great to hear. Michael, you mentioned a fair wage being really important to shopin.nyc, but anything else from an equity standpoint that sticks out?
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about New York City being the greatest city in the world with the incredible diversity of cultures, that's also the stories behind these small business owners. And that's something that, beyond being the tech e-com play and being a VC-backed startup, it's about amplifying those voices. And so we're going to have extra emphasis this year on amplifying those stories, because we're a company that believes that Black Lives Matter. And we want to make sure that those stories are heard. We have a section for BIPOC owned stores, women-owned businesses. We want to make sure that we're supporting this, because it's not just this group and that group. That is New York City. That is the culture of where we live right now. And those fuel those stores and the products that we love, that we cherish, that are unique and they're awesome. And that, again, make this the greatest city in the world.
Well, we have a lot of people joining us in the stream right now, and I'm going to get to some of their comments and questions right now. We have Dana from Minnesota, Kyle from Texas, Simone from Canada, and David from Massachusetts joining us in the stream right now. And we also have a comment here about just the future state of commercial real estate leases and pricing here in the city. Deshaun, I want to get your take on it. New York City is notoriously expensive, and this member is just asking, he's curious what the data will look like over the next month regarding commercial leases and pricing. Has the Chamber of Commerce thought about that, looked into that? What are you seeing?
So June, welcome to New York City soon. Yeah, we would love for you to come here. But when you think about the commercial real estate market, I mean, things have turned completely upside down. When you think about those big businesses that are occupying a lot of real estate and they have a big commercial real estate footprint, a lot of those companies are rethinking how much of a physical footprint they need to have, especially if many of your employees are going to be working remotely or you're going to be doing a hybrid model. So we've seen, the prices per square foot has gone down in New York City. There are a lot of deals that our landlords are helping to negotiate with their commercial tenants. There are a lot of incentives that landlords are putting on the table to encourage companies and employers to get their workers to come back in, to sign those leases. But it's going to be a little funky for a little while because we still don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. We had a slight increase in the positivity rate here in New York City. We have the Delta variant and other variants that are still out here. And a lot of companies are still trying to figure out what they need to have in place in order for their employees to feel safe. Employees are still figuring out how comfortable they feel coming into the workplace. So I think you're going to see some of this volatility for a little while with the real estate, with the commercial real estate market. But hopefully things will stabilize. Many companies are requiring their employees to come back into the office. So I think you'll see things stabilize there. But because there's been such a disruption, that's why we're seeing, prices go down a bit for commercial real estate, and as big businesses figure out what their physical footprint is going to look like.
Well, Deshaun, part of that disruption and volatility has to do with the fact that just New York City Transit is just not even close to full capacity right now. And so the people that used to be community into the city, supporting the businesses that you've been discussing, are just not there anymore. When are we going to see just full subway cars again? When are we going to see these communities actually being able to be supported by the workers who say maybe working from home still right now?
Mm-hmm. That's all going to depend on when businesses and employers are bringing their employees back. I know the New York City government, they slowly started bringing their workers back. I know many organizations are figuring out what their summer looks like. I've heard many people say that after Labor Day, that's when many of their employees are going to be coming back full time, or at least coming into the office more often. So as soon as we have more people coming back into the office, that's when you're going to see more people riding the trains. If more people are riding the trains and going into the office, then you're going to see many of those industries that are supported by those office workers doing much, much better. So my guess is that come the fall, we're definitely going to see more people riding the subway as businesses, as employees start to ramp back up. But that's all going to depend on when those big businesses are requiring their employees to come back into the office.
I certainly plan on taking the subway more often as LinkedIn gets back up and running in the Empire State Building. Deshaun, Michael, I'm an optimistic person myself, so I do want to end with some opportunity. I want to get your take on something that actually TaskRabbit CEO Stacey Brown-Philpott told us last June, and she was optimistic even back then. I want to get your take on what she told us and get your take on where we are at this point in the recovery.
This is an opportunity to think about, now that we've stabilized our business and we've adapted to what will become a new normal, there's opportunities for growth and innovation sitting in front of us. And it's a great opportunity to think about what those things are.
All right, Michael, I'm going to kick it to you first. Where are the opportunities in this new world? If you're a business owner joining us in this stream right now, or an entrepreneur looking to start something off, where are you seeing in terms of the opportunities for growth?
Sure. So it's common for people to say about how everything is globalized and you're able to ship things across the world. But what we're actually finding, the data shows that the future of e-com is proximity. It's about local. And it's not just about going down your street. It's about taking advantage of all of the incredible talent that is part of your community. And that's where you're able to get the unique items. And so when you're innovative, whether you're an immigrant or you're born and raised in New York City, this opportunity to start your own small business and be successful is greater today than ever before. And there's platforms out there that are helping amplify that, including Shop in NYC, to ensure that the discoverability is there. If you're doing something cool, there should be tech to help get that message out. Let other people discover how cool and unique your products are. And so that entrepreneurial spirit that defines New York City, I mean, it's never looked better than ever than today.
And Deshaun, what are you seeing in terms of opportunities? And are there any changes that happened during COVID that you feel like are here to stay, to the benefit of business owners, to the benefit of consumers here in New York City?
So Michael is completely right that there's so much opportunity in terms of starting a business. We've seen many more people forming their LLCs and forming their businesses. We've also seen with the pandemic, it's laid bare some of the inequities that we see in terms of access to technology, the public health crisis, education. I mean, if you think about it, overnight, we had to completely shift our operations online and virtual. So if you are a tech entrepreneur and you're figuring out how can you work with communities to make sure there's better access to technology in terms of education, healthcare, getting access to information, that's an incredible opportunity there. Before the pandemic, there was a shift to doing e-commerce and shopping online and selling your goods, services, and products online. That will absolutely be here to stay. And things have shifted so rapidly and have accelerated at a rapid pace because of the pandemic. So for businesses that weren't online before, the pandemic is proving and showing everyone that you absolutely need to have a digital presence, an online presence. You have to have a website. So the nature of marketing and getting access to your customers will look completely different. I don't think there's a way that we can go back to how business was beforehand. We're in a completely different business environment. Businesses have had to learn how to shift and pivot. So business owners, entrepreneurs are going to have to be nimble and figure out if there's another downturn like this, if there's another pandemic, if there's another crisis, we've already been prepared for these business disruptions. So we're seeing a lot of our businesses are more resilient because we've been through this pandemic, but the nature of businesses is shifted considerably. So everyone needs to have an online presence. So that part will be here for the foreseeable future.
Well, if New Yorkers are known for anything, it's resiliency. And I may be biased, but I think we're doing a pretty good job with this reopening. I want to thank all the first responders as well as business owners joining us in the stream right now for just making that happen. Michael and Deshaun, I want to thank you for joining us on the show as well as your contributions to getting this city back up to normal.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
That was Michael Park from shopin.nyc, as well as Deshaun Mars joining us from the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank them for joining us on today's show. We're having a great conversation about the great reopening, not just here in New York, but in other cities. And if you want to join it, you can check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're in mobile, you can click into that search box. Tomorrow, my colleague Andrew Seaman will be back with you for a conversation with Ebony Joyce, the founder of Next Level Career Services at 11 Eastern from the LinkedIn news page. She'll be talking about how to make your resume stand out as your personal profile and professional paths switch. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for joining us.